Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And welcome to Pride at Work Canada's Pro Pride 2022. Today's event is a fireside chat exploring intersectionality within 2SLGBTQIA+ communities. My name is Connor Pion. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them. And I'll be your MC for today. And before we get started, I wanted to quickly review a few technical pieces. So today we have live captioning available in English and in French, as well as simultaneous English to French interpretation, thanks to One Extra. Shout out to the whole team supporting us today. And so to access, hide, or modify the settings of your captions, you can do so. If you're accessing them through Zoom, you can do so by clicking on the closed caption icon on your Zoom toolbar, or if you're using the stream text links that are provided by Luis in the chat, you can modify them there as well. And they will be opening up in a separate window in a browser, and you can customize the font and the size of the captions there. In order to access the French interpretation, you just have to go to your Zoom control bar and find the globe icon. So click on Interpretation and select French. And please do let us know if you have any questions or any issues accessing either feature. As Zoom already notified you, we are recording. So the recording of the event today will be sent to you along with transcripts as well that will be available to all attendees. Just a reminder that your cameras and microphones are automatically switched off. So the best way to engage with Pride at Work Canada staff or your fellow attendees is by using the chat function. So it's the icon with the one text bubble in the Zoom control bar. Today, though, we'll also be using an interactive app named Slido. And so folks will be invited to join Slido, either using your cell phone or a browser. However, if when the time comes, you are unable to access Slido for any reason, we do encourage you to submit your questions using the Q&A function. So that's the icon with the two text bubbles in your Zoom control bar. And again, if you access or if you have any issues accessing these features or any kind of technical issues, do reach out to us in the chat and we'll do our best to support you. Our wonderful colleague Luis is there supporting in the chat, so reach out to him if you need any support. And then before we get started, I'd also like to start us off with a land acknowledgement. Pride at Work Canada works all across Northern Turtle Island on the traditional territories of the First Nations people, Métis Nations, and Inuit. And this, of course, includes Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA+ Indigenous people. And Pride at Work's main office is located in Chittagong or Toronto, as is my home office. And these lands and waters here are the traditional homes and territories of and cared for by the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, as well as the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And today, Toronto is home to Indigenous people from all across Turtle Island and beyond. And this includes many Afro-Indigenous and urban Indigenous people, as well as Two-Spirit, trans, and queer Indigenous people. Toronto itself is situated within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Treaty, which is held specifically between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. However, I'm a big believer that all Torontonians are treaty people. We have responsibilities tied to Treaty 13, to the Williams Treaties, and to the Covenant Chain Wampum Belt. So I encourage any of you who are tuning in from Toronto or the GTA to familiarize yourself with those treaties and get to know the roles and responsibilities that you have within them. And do check out, I have links on this slide, and you'll get a copy of the slide deck following the event. Some really fantastic resources, including Polishing the Chain Treaty Relations in Toronto, which is a fantastic series that's available on YouTube. I highly recommend it. So a little bit about us for any folks who are new to Pride at Work Canada. Through dialogue, education, and thought leadership, Pride at Work Canada empowers employers to build workplaces that celebrate all employees, regardless of gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. We help create safer and more inclusive workspaces that realize the full potential of all employees and bring down barriers to employment. Our networking, learning, and community events, they happen all across the country, a lot of them virtually these days, where really we're celebrating and connecting the most inclusive Canadian employers. Pride at Work Canada is proud to have the support of Bell for today's online event. I encourage folks to check out Bell's member page on our website to learn more about their commitment to diversity and vision for the future. So many thanks to Bell for your support. The format for today's discussion is a fireside chat, which includes opportunities for folks in attendance to engage with presenters. So using a Slido app, which is really fun and exciting. And so we ask that you contribute to cultivating an inclusive and accountable space with us, ask questions and engage in conversation with mutual respect, care, and compassion. Also just acknowledging that it could be really easy to multitask during these virtual events. We're all so busy, but we just ask that if you are here, that you just try to stay as present as you're able, but to also honor your needs and your family's needs first. We will have some time for questions and answers at the end of today's session. Again, you can submit those through the Zoom Q&A, but we're hoping that everyone will be able to actually use the Slido app and be able to ask questions and engage there. And we'll be here to support you in accessing that as well. If you ask any questions that don't get addressed today, especially if it's maybe something that's less related to the subject matter, please feel free to send us an email at info@prideatwork.ca. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our two speakers for today, Quinn and Prue. So Quinn's pronouns are he, him, and they, them. They use those interchangeably. En français, ses pronoms sont il et lui. Quinn is the Program and Engagement Coordinator at Pride at Work Canada, and he has 12 years of 2SLGBTQIA+ focused programming, advocacy, and peer support, specifically in the Ottawa region. And Prue's pronouns are she, her. En français, ses pronoms sont elle et la. Prue is the Business Development Coordinator at Pride at Work Canada, and her vision as a creative professional is to bring together the LGBTQ2+ community, people of color, and newcomers through meaningful engagement and persuasive dialogue. And so with that, I will pass the virtual microphone over to Quinn and Prue. Many thanks to both of you for joining us for this conversation today.
Thanks so much, Connor, for that introduction and for sort of setting the stage for us. And thanks to everyone for joining us here today. So as Connor mentioned, we're here to chat about intersectionality within 2SLGBTQIA+ communities. And this is going to be sort of a fireside chat, as Connor said. And really what we're going to be looking for is hearing from all of you as well in terms of any thoughts, questions, and ideas that you may have. Prue and I can bring a certain range of experience and knowledge and ideas. And we also recognize that we don't have all of the knowledge and that there is going to be a lot of really fantastic ideas coming from your participation in the Slido as well.
Yes, I would like to say thanks to Connor first for that lovely welcome. And I'm I'm honored to be here working with this organization and to have talked to you folks today. So thank you so much for joining us today. Connor, should we share the slide? I'm not able to see it here.
Yeah, so we're gonna get started with asking you folks a question right away. And so if everyone can go to the Slido, and there's a code on screen right now that you can put in, and that's also been added in the chat. And before we do too much more of an introduction around intersectionality, we really want to hear from you around what comes to mind when you think about the term intersectionality. Is it something you've heard before? Does that bring up certain ideas? And I also really want to be clear that there's no right answer. This isn't a test or a quiz or anything. We just want to hear what that brings up for you. But there's a number of different possible answers, and all of them are totally correct. Okay, so I'm starting to see a couple different answers coming in already around diversity, inclusion, how different identities an individual holds interact with each other. I love that. One thing that I see come up a couple times already as well is Kimberly Crenshaw.
There are some interesting answers out there.
Okay, so I'm going to take this moment to kind of chat a little bit about some of the history of this term intersectionality, and then Prue, if you want to talk about some of the answers that you're seeing in there after that. Does that work?
Sounds good.
Perfect. So, so one of the things that I saw come up a couple times was Kimberly Crenshaw, and I see as well that there's a TED Talk that's being shared in the chat by Kimberly Crenshaw. And so we often think of Kimberly Crenshaw as the person who kind of coined this term around intersectionality. So this is a term that comes out of specifically a legal context around employment, where there were specific cases coming up where Black women were being told that they had to take these employment complaints around discrimination, specifically around being women or specifically around being Black, and proving that these experiences affected all Black people or all women, and couldn't specifically take it from the context of Black women. And Kimberly Crenshaw sort of saw this and said, this isn't how our experiences and our lives work, and sort of went back to this idea of intersectionality. Now, that being said, we were all, some of us were in attendance at our virtual Pro Pride just a couple weeks ago, last week. And one of our amazing speakers on that panel, Catherine Miljani Jean-François, reminded all of us that intersectionality didn't start necessarily with Kimberly Crenshaw, but there were a number of other people, particularly queer Black women, who really already had formulated these ideas and experiences. And Kimberly Crenshaw sort of highlighted this specific term and popularized this specific term, but these experiences and ideas have existed for a long time. And so she also made sure to shout out people like Sojourner Truth, Audre Lorde, and Patricia Hill Collins as people who've been talking about these experiences for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about intersectionality, it often starts when you start developing as a person and you realize those different layers. Like for me, that was the case. And to have a word for that intersectionality and to actually address it and to look at different aspects of like work or housing or like, health, that actually made it more clear for me. So I was not really aware of what intersectionality meant um, in a more legal sense. So I think, when it was coined by Kimberly at the TED Talk, and a lot of folks started using it, and then it became a practice in workplaces, in healthcare, addressing not only like gender, but also like different sexual orientation and race and immigrant statuses. I think it became more popular that time. I think that's my experience with intersectionality and where it kind of came from. And looking at some of the answers here on Slido, I've seen quite a lot of people talk about privilege here, oppression and privilege. They're like uh, such opposite concepts, but what kind of privileges we have, even that's kind of, people have talked about that.
Yes, I love that. I think that that's such an important point, is that I see that right there. We can each be both oppressor and oppressed depending on the social context we find ourselves in, and it's ever changing. Yeah, open-mindedness, respect for differences, that people might have multiple different experiences, identities. These all overlap, that people are complex, multi-dimensional beings. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And even within the same identities, like definitions vary, the experiences vary, like the upbringing, the societal changes vary. So a lot of folks have talked about that, class, societal challenges. I think even within one category, there are so many layers. And you can see a lot of them addressed here.
Yeah. And I think it's like important for us to be recognizing that sort of it's this framework for understanding the ways that our social political identities work together to create these different experiences around oppression and privilege. And so I think people have brought this up to a certain extent. So I know for me, personally, I am a white trans dude. I have a number of other experiences and identities, as we all have. But my experience of being trans is going to be completely different than someone else's experience of being trans if they're a racialized person, for example. And so just because I share the identity of being trans with someone, it doesn't mean that our experiences of that same identity are going to be the same or similar, because we're all going to navigate those in really different ways. And that,
yeah. Sorry to cut you, but yes, precisely. I think I identify as a lesbian, and as a brown immigrant lesbian, I know so many folks who have had similar experiences as mine, but I also have had a different upbringing, different social behaviors and backgrounds that that made it difficult for me to access certain, things here. And I wouldn't understand some of the barriers that other folks might have faced, who lie within the same identity, literally everything. But a small aspect can be different, be it like disability, be it like culture, be it money, all of these aspects also tend to make a huge impact on how we view it, on how you have a view of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point of bringing up how these all interact, and that these are both our individual experiences, so how we experience the world, but that's shaped by these systems, right? So it's not just about who I am, but it's how these systems play out in my life, and all the ways that they interact and pile onto each other and shape each other. I know that's a bit, I don't know, not the most clear definition, but I think it's important to sort of, it's that these power structures exist and that they interact and reinforce each other and create specific experiences that might be different. And so sometimes I also think of terms around specific identities. So where people have pointed out these specific types of oppression that exist that are completely different. So one thing that comes to mind is if I'm talking about transphobia, that's going to be a very different experience than transmisogyny, which is the specific experiences of trans women and trans feminine people, where those types of systems interact. And that's going to be different again than transmisogynoir, which is like the specific experiences of where transphobia, misogyny, and anti-Black racism combine and create this specific experience and these specific forms of oppression. So we sort of see how these play out for a lot of different people as well.
And it's sometimes you're not even aware of those different layers, you know, until they're put in perspective for you by systems. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. You know, the way that, like for me, I never thought of my race or my sexuality play a big role in anything really. I just lived my life like that. But then you start noticing some of the discrepancies, you know, in systems, and you understand how they are formed. And so you actually do notice a lot of those layers about yourself, because you are one and the system is one. And like you said, they tend to collide. And while the system is for the people, it's for a very specific kind of people. So the more, I guess, the more identities, more factors are made aware of to people, that's when you really start to see a change in the system itself. Because that is the representation that kind of needs to happen to see a change in the larger picture, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I love that.
I'm just reading these comments. They're so powerful, and so many factors that we're not aware of ourselves as well.
Yeah, I'm loving reading all of these different conversations, and I think I see, you know, some of our identities can shift over time, which then shifts our intersectionality. So I think that that's another really good point, is that these things can play out in different ways throughout our lives, both if maybe our relationship to ability and disability might shift over time, and so then what our experiences are in the world and with these systems of power, those might change as well.
That's true. I never thought of it like that, how they can shift over time.
Yeah, so I think we've kind of talked a little bit about some of the history, some of what is intersectionality, and I love all of the different pieces that we're seeing in the Slido as well. Did you have other sort of points around, you know, what's intersectionality?
No, I think we've covered most of it, and you know, there are a lot of points here that we can keep talking about. I'm sure, but I guess we can move ahead with the next one. Just
Awesome. So yeah, I've got another question up here, which is, what are one or two of your social and or political identities? And I know people already put some of those examples in our first question. We don't have to worry about being too comprehensive, but just a couple of your identities that you'd like to share.
Yeah, yeah, we would really encourage folks to talk about like different aspects of their identities. And
Free
yeah,
thinker. Sure.
yeah, why not? Um, Especially, you know, certain what I have noticed is also language is a huge barrier and a part of an identity. You know, from like I'm from India, and our main language or national language is Hindi, but I also speak two other languages, which is English and Marathi. And as I recognize my privilege in getting into like a English school and English education and have a career in that. But to really see a lot of folks who immigrate to different country with who with English isn't their first language, that is really interesting thing for me, and I've noticed that so much because I don't see a lot of talk around language in Canada, and that's something that I just wanted to point out because I see so many different factors, but I rarely see the language being one of them, given that Canada is a home to so many settlers, immigrants, refugees, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm a English first speaker. And I also went to French immersion schools growing up. So I am quite privileged in that I speak sort of our two official languages within Canada. But even that concept around bilingualism within Canada is something that is really exclusive towards Indigenous languages, which are the first languages of this country, of this land that we're on. And so particularly living within Ottawa, where a lot of workers are working with government, there's a lot of limitations around jobs that people can get if they're not French English bilingual, when people might speak so many other languages. They might speak one of those two official languages and then might speak any of many other languages, but might not have that particular type of bilingualism. And what are the experiences that shape who is most likely to have that particular type of bilingualism of those two European languages, as opposed to speaking Indigenous languages or speaking any other language that people might speak?
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about like access to employment, or you can't even apply to jobs. I came here to be an artist, to be like an art manager, frankly. And when I was applying to these jobs, to these grants, it was so difficult. Like I was working with people, I was mentoring some of the folks to write grants, and English wasn't their first language. They didn't even it was really tough for them. And as an artist, you anyway have a little bit of like a lot of people have trouble articulating their thoughts according to the systems of a new country. And I noticed the gap where folks had to hire a translator to apply for a job or a grant. And and so many people, like I've had similar experiences with like in terms of like applying to a job to a lot of Indigenous folks, and that was very surprising to me. That oh, that's interesting. I thought you were from Canada, and we weren't being the same boat. But there were so many nuances that I could, that those identities, those barriers that matched. In terms of language, in terms of I come from a country that was colonized, so to have that intersection was quite interesting to see, someone who I've never met, someone who've, been on a different land altogether. So that was something which was interesting to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that really helps to shape, again, our understanding that it's not just about individual identities, but it's about how those identities interact with the systems around us, and that people might have similar experiences within those systems, regardless of specific identity.
Okay.
And I think one thing that's coming up for me as I see all of these different identities that people are sharing is the vast differences when we're talking about, 2SLGBTQIA plus identities and communities, that we're talking about communities and identities plural, even within this idea that's sort of this concept that's sometimes thought of as one group or community, but that a lot of these concepts, non-binary, queer, bisexual, asexual, like that, all of these are specific identities that people have within this space that are going to be different from each other. And all of those, again, are going to interact with all of these other experiences. And I know when you're speaking about language, the other thing that came up around that is that these identities and how we understand our sexuality and gender is often really shaped by language as well, and by cultural context. So I know that even as an organization, when we're teaching people about gender and sexuality, we're often doing that from a very, Western context, and we're explaining it within the framework of how gender and sexuality are understood within Canada. And that can also be a limitation and really shapes who is even perceived as queer, as trans, as gender diverse, as everything else. And so I think that that's a really important piece about language is, do we have the understandings of our identities? Do we have the words to describe ourselves in ways that make sense?
Yes, that's such a huge role, that plays such a huge role even for pronouns for me, the language, because Hindi or Marathi back home, back in India, there's a gender to every noun. So it's very difficult to have like a gender neutral like an approach. And so I didn't know when I was applying to jobs or when I was networking here that you're supposed to have your pronouns. I didn't know, I didn't understand it. So it was quite interesting to me that what's happening. And so to actually interact in that, because when I started understanding, when I started realizing what it means, it made a lot of sense for people back, like trans folks back in India as well, and how they had to make sense of the pronouns that were just given to them instead of using they, them. And that is also a barrier for a lot of folks, as queer people, because as a queer person, I was expected to know about these things. And I had no idea what am I getting into. So it's good to also learn from other people and understand that different like queer people also have different experiences based on language, be it race, be it like cultural upbringing.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That's such a good point. And I think that it's also a question there of like what knowledge and experience is being valued. which I think might lead us a little bit into our next next question, if
Yes.
you feel okay moving on to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to thank everyone for sharing. That was really wonderful to see so many identities in one slide. I don't know, it just felt really good to see so many people, have that those identities that they carry with them. So.
All right, so I see some people are already starting to put some answers in. But what would make a workplace more inclusive of employees and job seekers' intersectional identities? And it can be really like practical things, but we also want to hear your big dreams here. Don't be afraid to be to be doing sort of the blue skies, big dreams, whatever. It doesn't always have to be practical.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be something that's already been applied or whatever. It can be something that you dream of, and that can relate to any aspect of your identity. That can be race, that can be language, that can be disability, anything. So, not only gender and sexual orientation focus, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm saying gender neutral forms, not addressing people by gendered titles like Mr., Miss, and removing that from forms, non-gendered washrooms. So a lot of those sorts of things.
Yeah, I also read cultural time off, and that is so epic. That really resonates with me. I love it. I love that, to celebrate different cultures, because I really don't know what to do on Thanksgiving. Let me tell you that. I'm really confused on so many occasions, and the festivals that I celebrated back home. And so that was, I know I get time off if I asked. So I'm happy for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that that's so important, but I also think that there needs to be more structured ways of providing that time.
Yes.
Off. So I mean, certainly that there's a lot of different ways to sort of ask that, but that the onus should be on the employer around making sure that that's easy to access, as opposed to the onus being on the employee to request the time.
Yes, it does start from the top, because it also makes it a safe environment to even request or talk about those things. So, if it's coming from the top itself, I think the research or whatever needs to be done at the top, and then got bottom, like representation. Policies doesn't need to always have to be very company or like time off focused. There can be other policies as well, that are more related to different benefits, accessibility and whatnot. And I think that needs to start from the top, not from employees that don't look. It's not our job.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Unless you're in a specific position where that is in fact your job to make that happen.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that those are really important pieces. Oh, I'm going to try to get to the Slido so I can scroll a little bit. One moment.
I'm
there we
not
go.
able to scroll.
We're scrolling. There we go. Yeah, like benefits plans. Is the work location accessible to non-drivers? For sure. Like transportation is an important issue. How long does it take people to get to their workplace?
Yes.
Are the buses nearby good? Particularly recognizing that all of these ideas around intersectionality, again, they impact so many parts of our lives. So if people have multiple barriers to employment, they might typically make less money, be more likely to have been unemployed. Even there's some research that we worked on with the SRDC that showed that looking at specifically sexuality and how that impacts wages, that there's significant wage gaps from, you know, heterosexual men making the most money and bisexual women making the least, and sort of a range in between there. And so are people who are making less money, and we know that those types of wage gaps exist as well, on all sorts of different barriers that people
like beyond like pay gaps. This is about like before even that happens, I feel what needs to get addressed is who gets hired, you know, promoted or supported, and literally all those things in between as well. You know, it like all these small things add up to inequalities. Like I to even get a seat at the table is a huge process, let alone being at the table and then talking about pay gaps, you know. Like I noticed that like so many like jobs that I was applying to as an immigrant required a license, a driver's license, like a full driver's license. I was like, I just got here. You know, let me learn the rules here. Let me learn driving. Let me actually apply for it and get it. And I know there'll be some specific jobs that might require that. That's okay, which is specific to that. Some jobs don't really require that. And you see a lot of immigrants not really have the capacity to come to a country and directly stay in like core downtown, stay far away for, you know, to save money because they don't know when they'll get their jobs. And in this aspect, a lot of folks are also not out yet. So disclosure is a big part, you know, when you're yes, Louise, when they don't ask for Canadian experience, like when like everything starts with that. You know, the pay gap also talks about that Canadian experience, that the previous experience did not matter, as if, you know, you're a lot of folks are asked to disclose their status in the country. You know, visa status, immigrant status, refugee status, you know, non-documented, whatever. You know, the intersectionality also talks about background checks, you know, police background checks, and that might differ a lot. And that is something that is bizarre to me, how it's all under one box. And you don't really look at people and the experiences, but you actually just look at that check mark or whatever. I can keep talking about the barriers of employment when it comes to this, but because I just wanted to mention, yeah, I just want to talk about this before we actually get to employment. You know, all these things before getting a seat at the table.
Yes, yeah, and I think like you brought up background checks because of the oppressions that exist, and particularly racism, Indigenous and Black people are far more likely to have had interactions with the police. And we've seen that, like studies coming out around, you know, supposedly random stops being done that happen at much higher levels for Indigenous and Black people.
Yes.
So therefore, people are more likely to have something come up on a police records check and therefore can't get a job as a result of that. One example of an organization that's doing something really cool in that recruitment process is Food Share. And what they're doing is anonymizing all of their resumes before they're being screened by the hiring committee. So the hiring committee never actually sees huge parts of a person's resume before before interviewing them. So taking out details like their names, their address, like you brought up, that people might live farther away from their workplaces, educational and employment institutions, years of work experience. So they're looking at what experience that you have, but that it's not necessarily specific to that institution or what educational context. So not counting that Canadian experience as more important than other experience, but looking at your skills and experience as they are.
True. I think so many, I'm reading some comments here about how other companies are also doing that and also paying for interviews. I know so many tech companies have like 5, 6, 7 rounds of interviews, and they have like hours of time spent on these things. So it's not really accommodative of people's identities and times and whatnot. Another thing that also that brings up is how people are, the policies that are made or the protocols that are there. They are like people care about that, but only to the ones that they're familiar and comfortable with. It's okay. For example, like if just women, it's mostly white women, not black women, because they're not confident, they don't know, tone policing is there. It like I'm talking about how you want to address certain aspects of identities and bring them forward, but only things that they're comfortable with. And that really shifts the narrative about intersectionality, that changes the entire aspect of looking at things. And for employers to actually make that process, if they don't, if you remove name and if you remove address from someone's resume, experience, saying that my experience was all from another country or not, that changes, even though the skills are transferable. The location might trigger some of those aspects in a resume.
Yeah, so there's like a lot of different things that need to be taken off a resume to properly anonymize it and be aware of all those different factors.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you're talking about that like if you're trying to focus on women, that often that ends up being focusing on white women. That I think is exactly sort of the overview of intersectionality, right? It's that if you want to include women in the workplace and make sure that women are celebrated and in higher up positions, that has to start with women of color, that has to start with disabled women, that has to start with trans women. And if it is focused around those experiences, then all women are getting lifted up. But if it's just focused around women, which defaults to white women, then we're still leaving out huge swaths of the population. So intersectionality means that we're bringing up everybody as opposed to
just
a few
one
people. Yes.
Yeah, and obviously we can talk about different identities within the same context as well. Queer people, like just focusing on the LGB, and not the T and the other things that come after it. Even in terms of like cultural holidays, language, those are also some of the things that inclusive language and policies. For some folks to even understand policies, frankly, that is also something that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah. And I think that we've sort of talked a little bit about those hiring and recruitment processes. And then what you're talking about as well is that policies, things like that. So what happens once people are in that workplace? How are workplaces making sure that everyone continues to be included, right? You've brought on this great diverse workforce. Are they then being given opportunities for promotion? Are they the first ones to get fired if the workplace is being downsized? Are they being driven out by a series of microaggressions within the workplace? What else is happening there? So it doesn't stop at that recruitment, but that's obviously a very important piece.
Yeah, and this is a great comment. Not require referral. That is so. Oh my God! Like, I start getting palpitations whenever someone is asking for a referral, especially when I was not out, because I kept wondering that, oh my, what if they call up and disclose my identity and disclose that I'm queer, and that really freaked me out a lot. So, even those tiny aspects also make a huge difference. We have another comment here about like not disclosing pre-existing condition has already been discussed. Don't force employees to disclose any identity not relevant to their work. We see that in a lot of these big corporations happen.
Amazing. Thank you all for all of these amazing suggestions. I feel like we didn't even manage to get through half of the things that are in this Slido. So I'm really excited to take some lessons from everything that you've all shared in this Slido here. Now, I think we'd like to move into a Q&A type function around what are some of the questions that you have for us as well. So I like, okay, so I think there's sort of the, will we receive a transcript of the Slido responses? That's a great question. I believe we should be able to
pull that out.
Yeah.
We can include that in the resource.
Now, I think this is something that we are definitely might have some resources on. I encounter defensiveness when I bring up intersectionality and discrimination at work, especially with HR and senior leadership. Advice on navigating this. Do you want to start us off, Prue?
Where do I begin? So I think it really, first of all, for employees to bring this up with HR and senior leadership, that's the thing that we talked about, that we should start from the top and not employees. Like, they don't need to be the ones, holding on to that responsibility. So if it's not there, I guess really looking at what the policies are, what are the, like, that's why they're frankly defensive, because the policies doesn't say that. If it is in the policy, non-discrimination policies, more health benefits, like inclusive health benefits, I think when it's on paper, they don't have anything to be defensive about. So, I mean, my thought on this is, if it's not written, if it's not there in numbers, if it's not tangible, there's likely to be some defensive around that, and not just, hey, we are an inclusive culture workplace. Do you have anything to add to that, Quinn? Like, I don't think I have anything to how to navigate that conversation, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, it's hard to have those conversations. And I think one piece I do have is for anyone who's listening, it's easy to feel defensive if someone's telling you that you're doing something wrong. So I think it's important to recognize that we all make mistakes, and we are all always in a process of learning more. So if someone brings up a critique or is asking for better, it's because they believe that this is like, that change is possible and important and necessary. And if it's like an individual critique, it's because they believe you can change. So I take that as a gift. I take that as someone cares enough about my improvement that they've taken the time to share that piece of education with me and to ask me to do better. So that's maybe a bit of a suggestion on the other side of things, which is how to receive feedback and critiques, which I think is something that's hard to do.
And I think more, talking about how inclusion can also be a great business case. How that can actually help your organization grow and be more, I don't know, like more economically beneficial for your organization. So there are so many statistics out there about like pink money and how many diverse supplies there are out there, and organizations that are more open, and the more inclusive and diverse you are, I think it's beneficial for the business itself. So maybe that's a case that you can put forward to the HR.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways to have those conversations. And I think another thing that's bringing up is this question of what are some practical ways we can build solidarity with our colleagues. And I think that can also help with navigating those conversations with higher ups, is making sure that if possible, that it's not just you having that conversation, but that there's a group of you having that conversation, maybe where many of you are showing that you believe it's important.
Yeah, like I read a great article that day which talked about intersectionality within ERGs. So having those intersectionalities in ERG, so that kind of representation when it's there, that automatically, will show your solidarity and your allyship to other communities and other identities that are not represented. So, like I don't need to be just in a group like we're like a LGBTQ plus ERG. I can also be in like a ERG which talks about race and immigrants and things like that. So I can have that kind of, I can dip my toes in both these ERGs. So I think that's something that also one can do within organizations.
I love that. So I think that we've, unfortunately, there's so many questions that we don't even have the time to get to all of them. Again, if you have questions that we weren't able to get to, you can contact us. There's a number of different resources that are going to be shared out. There's some great resources on our website and a number of resources that have been shared in the chat. And I want to thank you all for being here, and I'm going to pass it back over to Connor.
Thank you both so much for everything that you shared, the conversation that you both wove into all of the fantastic engagement from all of the attendees has just been really incredible and like affirming to just be able to tune into. So thank you both so much for your vulnerability and in sharing some of your personal experiences and your insights. And thank you to everyone who has joined in either through Slido or the chat or the Q&A, recognizing that we didn't get to all the questions, but we're hoping that all these resources we put together will be helpful. And of course, feel free to reach out to us after the event as well. We will share a copy of the recording as well as the Slido results and a transcript and the slide deck, which has lots of great embedded links to other resources, including some of our previous Pride events, as well as a link to the podcast that Pride at Work has recently launched. I know Luis was also sharing that in the chat earlier, I believe. And then, of course, just an invitation to join us for our future events. Pro Pride continues on for the next couple of months, so be sure to check out our website and see whether you're able to join us in person or online, as many of our events this year are hybrid. And reach out if you have any final questions or any that didn't get addressed during the session. And thank you to our whole team, including Luis in the chat, as well as the folks providing captions and our interpreter. So many thanks to the whole team and to all of our attendees again. I wish you all safe and wonderful and affirming Pride seasons.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.